So before we begin with an opening meditation, here are a few questions for you to write down. Do you have a spiritual vision? If so, what is it? And how did it come about? Second theme. Do you believe your every desire, every prayer is cherished, more than heard, and is always answered? The third, what is your idea of perfection? And how has that idea changed over the years? And last, are you comfortable in what you might call your weakness? And if not, what are the times that you are uncomfortable? When you find within yourself what we might call weakness. So it's a very limited word, but I think that you understand the core of what I mean by that. Those are the 4 questions for this session. Great. So when you finish writing down, I invite you to put your pen down. And this opening meditation will be the chanting of Psalm 33. But I will chant one line, and then within mute, being on mute, you just repeat that line. And let yourself in the repetition just sink down like you're sinking down into the soft earth. And then there'll be a breathing exercise. And then last will be a chant that is very akin to Therese of Lisieux. She would have chanted this chant, but in addition, it is very tenderly a part of her own spirituality too. So I invite you to close your eyes. And keeping the eyes closed, let yourself have a moment of gratitude for anything. What is something that you feel immense gratitude for right now? And see if that gratitude can be the way that you, your mind, your body, your heart, and you on a soul level can open up to this moment that we have together. Let the gratitude be a way that you relax any parts of yourself that might be holding back, that might be reserved in a posture of defense, or even just in a moment of complacency. And from this place together, we form a circle of eternal love, because gratitude in community heightens the presence, heightens the Christ to us and within us as a whole. And we are here to be awakened in that presence. All of us, each of us, like children who are surprised anew when they turn the corner and see something beautiful. I invite you in your own way, whispering or full-throated on mute, to repeat after me. Oh God, you are my God. For you I long. For you my body yearns. For you my soul thirsts. Like a land parched and lifeless, and without water. So I look to you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory. For your love is better than life. My lips shall sing your praise. I will bless you all my life. Lifting up my hands, I call your name. My soul shall savor you like a banquet. My mouth shall shout your praise. My soul clings fast to you. Your right hand holds me fast. I invite you to take your left hand and place it on the center of your chest, on the place we call the heart in the heart chakra. And bring your inward gaze to the center of this heart and heart chakra. Let the breath move, expanding the heart and contracting the heart as the heart itself beats. Let the breath be like the wings of a bird, opening the heart as it beats. Let yourself lose the sense of observation and relax into being a heart with all that it represents. Being open to love, and like the breath, giving and receiving, arising and subsiding, expanding and contracting. So your heart and you as love, open to the movement of love, the steady, constant, pervading presence that remains untouched amidst the varying states of your own being. And in this openness, all that you long for, all for which you have made is held and cherished. Allow this chant to support that experience. Redemptoris Mater, quae peria cedi, porta manes, stella maris, succurre cadenti, suggere qui curat populo, tuque genuisti, natura mirante, tum sanctum genitorem, Virgo prius, ac posterius Gabrielis abore, sumensitur ave, peccatorum miserere. And when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. In Carmelite liturgy, and liturgy is the rhythm of chant and prayer and meditation that makes up the entire year, there's a certain part of the year that particular Marian anthem, that's a very solemn anthem, is chanted. And it's chanted in the evenings. It's chanted before what is called night prayer or Compline. And Therese herself would have chanted that very Alma. And I chose it because Alma is a very intimate and tender word used for the divine feminine or for Mary, for Mama, and her relationship really with all of her out-of-body spiritual friends, but in this case, Mary, was one of great playfulness and vulnerability. She was definitely someone, if you have read her writings, she found it insane that we put Mary up on a pedestal as though we needed something from Mary. She said, what kind of mom is that? A mom that outshines everyone. She had a deep and keen insight into the experience of God in many forms, in that it is an inward, illuminating, outward experience at all times. So it's really a treat and a humbling honor to let her be the topic of what I'm going to present before you. I'm someone that loves to just sit at the feet of revealings and reflections, so hopefully you find yourself comfortable with that as well. The word that came most strongly to me as I was preparing for tonight's talk was the word desire. Therese was on fire with desire. And in all traditions, all spiritual traditions, you will find, and it's even within Western psyche, it's within all aspects of humanity, that oftentimes the word desire is coupled with almost an admonition to be wary of desire. And certainly, we want to not dissipate and give ourselves over to the kinds of actions following on desires that hurt us or hurt others. But what can be lost in that is the fact that desire is at the essence of who and what we are. And Therese exemplifies a living desire of union with God that is absolutely audacious, absolutely unstoppable. And if you want an articulation of that, if you have her act of oblation to merciful love, you will see this in its fullness. And bear in mind, she's late 1800s flowery French language, but you can feel it in her, that intensity. And what she has to bring to us is a visionary stance. She was utterly a visionary. And her visionary stance of her spirituality, she had strong spiritual vision all her life, from the age of 3 onward. She had a clear focus about what her life was about and the spiritual vision that was the makeup of her life. And this came from her experience. It did not come from her thinking through something. It did not come from her observing life and stepping back and reflecting on life. It came from a very raw experience of the divine. She herself says that she was aware of God's presence so strongly and so clearly at the age of 3 that she has never found herself out of that presence. She died when she was 24, but that's 21 years through all the formative ages, all the way up to her death, that she had nothing other than that direct experience. So what she brings to us as a Carmelite mystic and as a friend is that clarity coming from the experience that visionaries have. And I say that with a certain tongue in cheek, because we can look at individuals who we consider great, and all of them are visionaries, because they were willing to surrender to the experience of a truth that formed them independent of what we might call the constructs of being in this world are. The things that we term what it means to be a success, the cultural influences, the familial influences, the collective consciousness influences. However, while they may be exclusive to name, it is inclusive, because each of us is called to be a visionary in our own life. Each of us, in the answering to the call to self-realization, are answering the call that leads us to be a visionary. And that's a very solitary journey. Very solitary. Through her experience that led her to be such a force of God nature, if you will, she was asked in her early 20s if she considered herself humble. She was asked by one of the prioresses in her monastery. And it's almost like a trick question, right? Because in traditional spirituality, you're always striving to be humble and admitting that you're not humble. So it's almost like a catch-22. How do you answer the question, are you humble? Yes, no, like. And she, in her utter freedom and liberation, could say, I believe that I am humble. because I have always been obedient to the truth as it reveals itself within my own heart. It's worthy to reflect on that. She, without any formal indoctrination that would have given her a system of knowledge of how to speak about these things, could utter so quickly and simply that very truth. And within that, she's harnessed this desire to that obedire. Obedience can seem so oppressive, but from the Latin obedire, all it means is to listen. All it means is to listen in such a way that you fall into the alignment of it. And she, through her intense desires, fell into the alignment of the fullness of embodying God's presence. Therese seems to have 4 periods in her life, and I want to share these because they lead to the quote that was in the email that's the setup for tonight. The first phase in her life spans, so remember chronology is, it doesn't really matter so much, but it does give us a context. The first phase in her life goes from year 1 to 3. And in that phase in her life, and this is my reflection on my relationship with her. I can't give you a book on this. So this is what I teach in relation to her. This whole theme of those early years is summed up in this one phrase: God surrounded me with tender caresses. And in that direct experience, here is where emerges her call and her spiritual vision. I'm going to read this quote. It comes from her book, Story of a Soul. Her sister, Leonie, gives another sister, Celine, and Therese a basket of toys, saying, "Here, my little sisters, choose. I'm giving you all of this." Celine stretched out her hand and took a little ball of wool that pleased her. After a moment's reflection, Therese says, I stretched out my hand, saying, I choose all. And I took the basket without further ceremony. This incident of my childhood is a summary of my whole life. I cry out, my God, I choose all. I don't want to be a saint by halves. There is a thrust of desire there, right? Presented with something, in order to respond to what she was presented to, it had to be impelled by a desire, and a desire that was surrendered to this really essential nature of what it means to be human, and that is to be wired for God, to be the embodiment. I like the phrase embodiment of consciousness. It seems to me to be more nuanced and interpenetrating. And in that, her response was not hesitation. She wasn't waiting for someone to say it was okay. She wasn't worried what anyone thought of her. She wasn't wondering if it was the right thing to do. She let herself move with the fullness of that desire. And it's a call out to us, because in the experience, in your experience, in my experience, that fires up within us, we have the opportunity in the privacy of our own counsel to surrender with such intensity and simplicity that we say nothing less. And from there, all the other chips fall. And usually they fall into place, but they all fall from there. So here she's got the summary of her whole life at age 3, which is pretty remarkable. What happens after that is oftentimes what happens in all of our lives. And that is that she enters into a second period in her life. And this goes from the ages of 4 to the age of 14. And she sums up this period of her life with this phrase: God brought me through the crucible of trial. You have the opportunity to define that in a way that works for you and speaks. But let me read you this quote that sets in motion that trial. Her mom died when she was 3, and she was going through a lot of loss in her younger years. Her older sisters, one by one, kept going away to convents, but the first big loss was her mom. And she says, "My happy disposition completely changed after Mama's death. I, once so full of life, became timid and retiring, sensitive to the excessive degree. One look was enough to reduce me to tears." And in that tremendous sensitivity, if you've ever learned anything about her life, she ends up becoming more sensitive as her 2 older sisters, Marie and Pauline, end up joining convents, monasteries, because she keeps trying to replace this mom presence. Her mom dies, she replaces it with another. They leave, replaces it with another. They leave. And in that, she ends up having a real nervous breakdown where she finds herself for periods of time unable to speak and really unable to get out of bed. And things take on gross proportions for her oftentimes when she's looking out as she speaks. She says she can always hear what everyone's saying during that time. Through that, she ends up having a direct experience of Mary, the mother of Jesus, which is incredibly natural, right? Because then you get the mama, the divine mama, replacing that. But she still is incredibly, incredibly sensitive. But what is the instance that moves her through that period? Again, remember, she's experiencing God's presence through all of this. What ends up happening is she finds within herself the inner resource to stand in her own strength no matter what happens. So when she's 14, there's a ritual that her family has, and that's this ritual of going to a service and then coming home and pulling down stockings, and that her father would always be really excited about it. And he, going through his own challenges on this particular Christmas period, was not happy at all. He was like, "I'm really glad when this is going to be over." He's impatient. He has a normal moment of human impatience. And Therese, through her oversensitivity, runs upstairs, and she's deeply, deeply shaken by it. But then her surrender that has been there all along accesses the channel of the fullness of grace that is within her. And in that moment, she becomes autonomous. And in that autonomy, she runs downstairs. She is her own woman. She brings her own joy. She goes about what makes her happy. And in her actions of pulling down the stocking and just going about things, her autonomy changes everything all around her. And the place is infected with joy. Her being true to the deep nature of her desires yields that fruit. And she stays the course. As you probably know, if you are aware of her life, she finally enters the monastery, which she longed to enter when she was 16 years old. But this next period in her life, from 15 until, I'm going to read the exact date, April of 1896, so when she's 23 years old. So for all of those years, she said, this is the most illuminating period of my life. So when she had that shift within her where she became autonomous, she was open to the illumination that could be had. And you can see in her writings, there's insight after insight after insight. And within this time, she is propelled by her desires. She's at prayer one time, and she is inflamed with wanting to understand what her vocation was. So here she is already Carmelite, but she's so on fire. She wants to be a martyr, and she wants to be a priest, and she wants to be a missionary, and she wants to be everything possible that could be an instrument of grace. And she had no rest. And there's something incredible about not accepting no. It could be so easy in that moment of having all those diverse desires to feel division, tension, contraction, confusion. But she, because her desire is so aligned with Source, she's like, there has to be an answer that I can be all of these things. And she does what works for her. She opens a Bible. Your instrument of being open to the grace that is there for you at all times can be anything. But for her, it was to open a Bible. And what does she open to? She opens to two passages, Proverbs 9 and Isaiah 66. And I'm going to read what she writes. Whoever is a little one, let them come to me. So she read that, and that gave her a key to how she could be fulfilled in these desires. But it wasn't the answer. So she didn't stop there. She goes on, but wanting to know, oh my God, what you would do to the little one, I continued my search and discovered, as one whom a mother caresses, so will I comfort you. You shall be carried at the breasts and upon the knees. They shall caress you. I had no need to grow up, but rather I had to remain little and become this more and more. And in that attitude and in that inner knowing of her path, her mechanism, she could open up to the fulfillment of her desires that come in Corinthians. What is said there? I'm going to paraphrase it since we don't have a lot of time. Summing it up, that the greatest gift is love. And in that, it's a longer passage which I can send to you. In that, realizing that prophets have a place and healers have a place and missionaries have a place and all of these action steps and roles have a place, that undergirding them all is love. And she said, I've got it. That's my vocation, to be love. Because when I am love, I am all of these roles. Isn't that just incredible? The revelation is incredible, but what's more incredible is that she didn't stop. When her desire wasn't met, She didn't doubt herself and say, well, maybe I'm not meant to desire that. Well, maybe I need to examine my desires. She was so confident that these desires could only be of God. And therefore, if they were given to her, they were meant to be fulfilled. That all she had to do was discover how it's going to be fulfilled. See where the questioning lay? What an inspiration for us. And from there, she goes to the last period in her life, which is from that age 23 and then when she dies, which is September 30th of 1897. So about a year and a half later. And she's entered into a period where all her consolation and knowing was gone. And this is where she says, your love has gone before me, and it has grown with me. And now it is an abyss whose depths I cannot fathom. Love attracts love. And my God, my Jesus, my love leaps towards yours. She had become love so entirely that if you go back to the email, you'll see this all-penetrating statement that she longs to return love in equal portion as what she has received from this eternal source. Her desire is so all-consuming that she wants to return the manifold eternal source of love equally. And she has the key that she will be in that source in such a way that that love flows through her as her to her beloved. Such an incredible source of inspiration we have. And I believe the reason I shared those stages in her life, because I believe there's a lot of similarity in the human experience, that we go through these phases of undoing. But if she were to say her key, it's that she audaciously stayed in the desire. She oftentimes fell asleep during devotions and times of meditation, and where many would have been finding themselves reprehensible or trying to figure out what they needed to do, she replaced it. She was so undaunted in her confidence that she said, you don't need me to be awake to accomplish the fullness of healing and love for all those entrusted to me. She took on the beginning of the Song of Songs as her own. Draw me and we will follow. And her prayer was that all that were entrusted to her would be drawn as she keeps her eyes on being drawn. So rather than being drawn and turning to be an instrument, she's like, you don't need me to do that. I just keep being drawn, and all that are given to me are going to follow. Why? Because of the interconnectedness of all things. She knew what quantum physics is so proving today, that she could not be drawn in all fullness into union without all the world being drawn alongside. And on her deathbed, when she had been irritable with somebody that visited her, one of the nuns, the nun came back the next day and said to her, Therese, aren't you worried that you are so close to death and you are so imperfect? Because Therese apologized for being impatient. And she said, absolutely not. My union with God is not dependent on me being freed of all these weaknesses. In fact, she said, I expect to discover new weaknesses every day. so completely at ease with her human nature because her divine union was so all-consuming. And it is such a great, great opportunity for me, for each of you, to revisit our own relationship and our own lives around these pieces. Those questions you have written down, I invite you to take them later because they're at the core of things that she speaks to so clearly and succinctly. I'll bring this reflection to a close with a recollection she had when she was younger. In the evening, at that moment when the sun seems to bathe itself in the immensity of the waves, leaving a luminous trail behind, I went and sat down on the huge rock near the ocean with Pauline. I contemplated this trail for a long time. It was to me the image of God's grace, shedding its light across the path the little white sailed vessel had to travel. I made the resolution never to wander far away from this luminous trail, which she calls the glance of Jesus. The shining light illuminating a trail that seems to come to the shore where they sit on the rock, and that very light itself being a divine glance. A glance looking at her. And in that looking at her, calls her to look, to return that gaze, that glance. Really nice, juicy way to start our Carmelite series. So I'm going to turn this recording off